y'all. This is Market Explainer, America's #1 business news podcast. My name is Danny. I am joined always by my junior associate co-host. One of these days, he's just going to be a junior co-host.
Never, ever.
Yeah.
I am always the big man, and you are just Danny. I am always the successful one of the two of us with all the knowledge. And
I don't know if that's true. So we're doing this. We had a slate of stories. We had a little hiccup this week. We couldn't get this recorded in time. So some of these stories, But if we could all think back in our brain machines to way back when Facebook was just not working for a day. Do you remember that? It was like 1999.
Well, look, in today's world, obviously, the internet is what happened a week ago can be a long time, but this is really important. So what we're obviously discussing is a little over a week ago, Facebook went down for, I think, a grand total of, what was it? A grand total of, I'm trying to think, 6 hours, right? 6 hours, which people, again, short memories. Facebook went down for about 24 hours a couple of years ago, and didn't cause this kind of stir. But we live in a different world. Even though that was only 2 years ago, we live in a completely different world for some reason in 2021. So Facebook was down, Instagram was down, right? Essentially all of Facebook's products were down for 6 hours. And when I say down, the entire system was down, which led to an entire beautiful day on things like TikTok and stuff like that of people guessing why they were down.
So I saw an article from America's leading technology publication, Barstool Sports, that said that Facebook was just deleted off the internet. Like I said, since they're America's leading technology publication, I took that as fact, and I just expected that Facebook would never return.
And that was one of the conspiracy theories, is that the source code, right, what they call the source code, was deleted off the internet. And, so this is what I appreciate about stories like this, and we'll get to actually what happened in a minute, but I think this is the actual story within this, is during that. And we're only talking about 6 hours here, folks. We're only talking about 6 hours from, 7 to 8 o'clock in the morning through the midday. It spawned story after stories. Now, we all know that Danny loves to, even though he'll deny it, he is the conspiratorial of the two of us. His imagination loves to run wild. This also happened to be the morning after the Facebook whistleblower did an interview about Facebook. So listen, a lot of people tried to link these two things.
I'm not saying that Facebook you shut their site down to delete a bunch of data that might incriminate them. I'm not saying that. I'm also not saying that leak was a plant.
Oh, yes.
All of a sudden we have this leak saying we need more regulations we need to regulate social media as an enterprise, because anytime you regulate something, all it's going to do is prevent Facebook's competitors from existing and growing. Because, God forbid,
Barkerberg.
Have any competition.
Well, so my favorite conspiracies are the conspiracies that the conspiracy is a conspiracy. That's, so like you just said, the whistleblower being a conspiracy.
No, that's
for a conspiracy.
That's a proven fact.
No, it's not. It's not.
Yes, it is.
But that was one of my favorite conspiracies during that time frame. Was there were several videos that came out. I think I saw most of them on TikTok. I saw them a couple of other places that were of
You're
people
too old to be on TikTok.
Well, that were of people that were portraying themselves as technology experts in some way or another, and like you said, saying that okay, the whistleblower comes out, so Facebook is essentially doing the old school, we're shutting everything down so that we can actually wipe things clean and restart them, because we all know that's how you truly delete things, is you know what I mean, you overwrite that data on the hard drive, yada yada. So that was one of my favorite. That was absolutely going crazy and wild, right? Of course, the deleted source code was another conspiracy theory out there that somebody, hackers. It's not. It 100%. That is not what happened.
That's not what happened. It was just poor reporting.
Well, it was. Look, this happens a lot in today's world, and it happens a lot in business, which is why. But we're so fast paced in today's world, the 24-hour news cycle, that almost any story that catches traction becomes the truth until it's proven otherwise days later. But then people don't necessarily read the truth days later. Right? And this has happened on Reddit before. It's happened with anybody that has these big audiences, that something becomes even partially true or sounds true, and then it gains traction.
And that's what's called fake news, right? You can go out there and say something that's not true and come back. Listen, you're saying days later. I'm saying they can correct a story within 8 hours. Doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Nobody cares after 8 hours. Correct. Absolutely. If you launch a story at the beginning of a workday, that's it. That's the narrative. Right. So I'm going to continue believing and spreading the news that Facebook's source code was actually deleted.
That is not what happened. No. The simplest way to explain what happened is there are really two parts of the internet. When you go onto Google and you type in an address, it, like your physical address, it goes to a place called the DNS servers that essentially connects you to where that website lives, whether it's Google, whether it's GoDaddy, wherever, whether it's a server sitting in your house, there's a connection in the middle. What happened is a cascade failure between those two things, between Facebook servers and the DNS servers, which is why you couldn't find the source code, right? Because there was a disconnect of where that source code lives, right? People don't understand the way the internet works, so you can... This happens in medicine and business all the time. If I use enough big words, I can make something sound, well, I can't find the source code. The source code is gone. Well, it's because you don't have access to the source code, because that connection is gone. Now, this is not supposed to happen. That's why they call it a cascade failure, when something goes wrong that leads to a domino effect of everything going wrong. So what happened in this case, standard update on a server or on several servers didn't work. And if you don't know, there are redundancies, right? This is supposed to happen on this while these others are working, and then vice versa. The problem is when people aren't necessarily doing their jobs, and there's so much automated in today's world, when something like an update on your computer and it doesn't load properly, and you don't know about it until you need your computer, because your computer's just sitting there, is essentially what happened here. You had servers that were being updated. There was something wrong with that update that caused everything to stop. And when it wasn't caught before it went to the next set, and then the next set, and then the next set, and it caused what's a cascade of servers going down and the process going down. The problem, though, is like Google and Facebook and these places that are so reliant on their own software. Facebook employees couldn't get in the building. Facebook employees couldn't access their information. The first problem they had with dealing with this, actually, and I'm surprised it didn't take longer than 6 hours, is the people that were in charge or that could fix it couldn't gain access to fix the problem.
And the reason the big man is so intimately familiar with how the internet works is because he is so old. He was there when it was invented by Al Gore. was
That is
physically
partially
there.
true. That is partially me. There is a reason that there are the people that deal with the hardware side of almost
A little
everything in
older.
technology are like
Are
me,
older.
right? Because we
Yeah,
were
they're
around
Gen
when you
Xers,
had to
'cause-
figure out, almost like
Yes.
your car, you had to diagnose what was wrong with the computer and figure out
Right.
whether it's a hard drive or whether it was this or whether it was that.
Oh,
And so computers in the old days used to be very like automotive, right? You kind of
Right.
figured it out and diagnosed it yourself and then replaced it. And that's why there's so many hardware guys that are
Right.
older generations, because they had to figure this stuff out. And believe it or not, the internet and hardware of computer systems works very the way it did 30 years ago,
Right.
right? With
It's just
the way
that
it
the
works.
chips are faster, and then everything else is, just more advanced, but similar.
Right, but it's similar in the way that it's laid out, right? A heat sink is still a heat sink, a fan is still a fan, you know what I mean? A processor is still a processor. They're still laid out in a very similar way that they were 30 years ago. Right. And that'll change actually in the near future, but that's a completely different conversation. This one surrounds the fact that I think the conspiracy theories I think the most fun about this story is all the different conspiracy theories, hackers,
Yes.
the whistleblower, you know what I mean? All the source code thing is what people during that time did. Now, one of the other sides of this that I think was good that came out of this, I saw on Reddit entire threads of people that were so afraid because their business relies so heavily on Facebook
Instagram,
advertising.
Right.
These kind of, when I say Facebook in this case, I'm talking about all of it, right?
Yeah, because it was not just Facebook, the single app. Facebook erroneously has named its corporate umbrella Facebook, as well as their website's named Facebook. Right. Google had done this for a long time, and then they created Alphabet, which is the holdings company that owns everything. Because when we're talking about this, we're not just talking about Facebook, the app, we're talking about Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, which is horrifying, and Oculus. We're all down. And
well, but when Messenger, they've pushed that out as people use Messenger as their text messaging app, as their whole, like, they've encompassed that into what everybody can use for almost all messaging, right?
And that kind of stuff. Phone calls and video chats with Messenger.
Absolutely. Wow, so all of that being down, you had people that their entire way of doing business, not just business, but personal as well, did not function. Right. Yeah, and if you've relied on it for long enough, you don't know how to use other things either. Right. Like, that's the way it works.
I know people who have WhatsApp groups in their industry, and it's them and competitors who are in this WhatsApp group, and they're constantly like, hey, how many units did you move today? Can we do some horse trading, that kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And, if you're losing a day of business, for people, that revenue is a lot of money. But you know who lost a lot more money? Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, they lost fake money. So what was that number, Danny? What was that number?
I've seen $5 billion.
Okay.
In loss in value in a matter of 6 hours, which they've probably gained back by now, right?
Well, their stock's up over 20% for the year. Right?
Yeah.
So that's even with the downtrend. So we've talked about this before, stocks are emotional, right? Whether they should be or not, completely different conversation, right? But stocks are emotional beings. So during that trading day of this being a thing, people get emotional and go, well, is Facebook dead? Right? Like, that was one of the most emotional headlines of that day during the time is this Facebook, and I think it kind of tagged on to the conspiracy theory that the source code was gone, and people were going, well, Facebook, if the source code is gone and there are no backups because you can't access the backups, then Facebook is essentially dead, which is a line of thought that is kind of partially true. Right? That Facebook, Instagram, and that would just be dead. Like, literally would never come back. And then you go, okay, what does that do to the stock? What does that do to ads? What lost revenue? And yada, 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 yada. And so the stock, it hit like you said, a $5 billion loss during that. But now again, that's pretend loss, meaning that the stock is fake.
So it's not So, unfortunately, when we have discussions about these sorts of subjects, people's belief is, oh, someone showed up to Mark Zuckerberg's Wells Fargo account and took out
Right.
$6.9 $6 billion.
$6 billion.
Yeah, that's not what happened.
No.
Mark Zuckerberg owns a percentage of Facebook, and that's the stock traded enough that the value of his stock lost $6 billion. It doesn't change anything about how he lives his life at all, ever.
Right. Well, that number though is newsworthy, right?
Yes.
Is what we get as you go, well, someone, in this case, Facebook, lost a net worth of $6 billion, which
Right.
to people, that number is an insane amount of money, and
Right.
that itself is the story. Everything under the story is irrelevant. Whatever people wrote, they only wrote that article so that they could say Facebook lost $6 billion, even though the company, as far as a whole, is still up for the year. Right?
Of course.
So if you invested in Facebook on January 1st and you still own the stock the day that this happened, you still made money, right, on your investment.
Yeah, but I made less money than I had made before, and that's what makes everybody sad.
Well, I mean, again, it's one of those things. Look, this is one of those things where I think obviously we're on the other side of it. Facebook came back. All the conspiracy theories are 100% garbage at this point.
I spent roughly a little over a month to transition our Facebook page from our former dead name, which I refuse to say on this show now, to our new name, Market Explainer. I had to change it every week. I had to change it a little bit. And I did all of that work. And I was so irate at the notion that I done all that work just to have them not be on the internet for 6 hours.
Y'all should have heard Danny during this process. It was, Danny was, when he says he was irate, that is an understatement of the century.
I'm not the kind of person to get upset at people, because human beings are flawed, and I'm flawed, and I understand that. But there's something about when technology or something mechanical doesn't work correctly, I see red. And it's just
for no reason, by the way. For no reason. Like when there's no logic to why this computer will not work the way it's supposed to, or approve what it's supposed to approve, or whatever. Absolutely. I think that is 100% correct. We are on the other side of this. I think we'll have to do a follow-up story down the line to see whether this whistleblower part of this story, how it actually affects Facebook in the long term, or if it affects Facebook at all.
It won't affect Facebook. Here's how it will affect Facebook. There's some kid right now who's 16 or 17 who has a great idea for a blockchain social media website that everyone will want to use. And they won't get to make their website, or they won't get to make their app, because Mark Zuckerberg will have used the federal government to squash that kid's dreams. And that's the story of the whistleblower. It's fake.
As Danny would say, that is such a red pill thing to say.
Yes.
And I disagree wholeheartedly, because
it's called a fact, big man.
It is not a fact. That is not the definition of fact. That is your opinion. That is an opinion of Danny of Market Explainer.
My opinions are facts. And here's another fact. We're moving on to the next story.
There you go.
But before we do that, I want to tell everybody about Acre Gold. Meet the new store of value. It's same as the old store of value. The original store of value, gold. Timeless, thoughtfully designed, coming in at 2.5 gram increments. Acre Gold allows you to set up an account, make a monthly deposit, automatic deposit into that account. And when you reach the price of a 2.5 gram bar of gold, they send it to you. It's a great way. Imagine that. It's a great way for the seasoned gold investor or someone who's just getting started to invest in gold without breaking their back. You can click the link in the description down below, and you can get started with Acre Gold today. Now,
we actually signed up for this because I was a big fan of that particular process.
Yes.
It's crazy to me that people buy gold for it to, according to the company you're buying it from, sit in a warehouse somewhere, which really, like, seriously.
Yeah, what was the point of buying it then?
Well, but do you even know it's there? Like, do you
Right.
like? There's going to be a point in the future where I think that a lot of those companies come out as fraud because they weren't actually buying the gold to back up what you know what I mean.
And listen,
so
who do you
have
think
your
you are?
gold in your hands?
Who do those companies think they are? The Federal Reserve?
Speaking of, Danny's starting one of those companies next week. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. Go ahead. What's our
Danny's
next
gold.
story?
This next story, no big deal. Okay, came and went. And listen, this just proves what I've always been saying. Regulations don't hurt anybody except for the little guy. The Pandora Papers, which are a bunch of leaked documents based on a research project by 150 news outlets, which are probably all fake. 600 journalists got together, and there's a statistic out there that the average journalist has an alcohol problem. So
Imagine that.
not super reliable, but this is a bigger cache of documents than the 2016 Panama Papers, from which they made a couple of movies and all this other stuff.
Sure.
And basically, what the takeaway from this story is a bunch of prime ministers, a bunch of heads of state are tucking away their assets through shell corporations, and a handful of law firms help them do it. And the big takeaway is, duh.
Well, that's my whole duh. Like this is so. When originally this came out, Danny and I were actually going to talk about this last week, and we decided to postpone it a week because I was very interested to see where this story was going to go and how much
nowhere.
Exactly, and
it was
how it was really going to influence.
It just went like this,
right? Because there was nothing in here. 600 people, journalists, right? 12 million files, yada yada. Took them some time to go through this, but so far of everything I've read about this story, there's nothing in here that would surprise anybody. Not anywhere in what we would call the developed world. I think out of all of this, the part of me that is the most not surprised, but I hope that there are people out there in countries out there that are in these areas, because part of this paper was there are impoverished nations out there that are still under either dictatorships or monarchies that are in these papers are these dictators and monarchies, while they're people in countries that are starving, that have nothing, have tucked away millions and millions of dollars.
Hundreds of millions of dollars
away from their own country, their own people.
And so I don't want to get into what specific countries, because I like living. I'm super into living my life. I'm not sick. I'm very careful driver. I always wear a seatbelt. I like living my life. So if I take 2 to the back of the head, we all know what happened. But this was there's a lot of different videos you can go watch online about this whole thing. The takeaway from the 2016 Panama Papers was that all these huge these wealthy individuals were going out there and doing things with this law firm called Mossack Fonseca in Panama, where they tucked their assets to avoid tax. Here in the United States of America, we have this Supreme Court ruling that says whatever you can legally do to mitigate your tax burden, you're allowed to do that.
Absolutely. It's perfectly legal. And we have we have 2 or 3 states, I think Delaware is one of them, that are
Nevada,
actual
South
tax
Dakota.
havens.
Yes.
And in the last decade have become some of the biggest tax havens in the world, by the way. Okay, so, we like to pick on places like Switzerland and, these kind of places. Right. But the states that are tax havens in the United States have become some of the largest tax havens for the international world.
So the thing is, the United States is a weird country. It's one of only 2 countries in the world that taxes you based on citizenship. Right. So if you're a non-citizen of the United States, it's easier to tuck and hide assets in the United States, because if you're a citizen of the United States, they are going to make you pay your taxes one way or the other. And pay is a funny word, because I've never paid a tax before. They just take my money.
Well,
the government just takes my money.
90% of, in this case, the Pandora Papers or whatever, you're talking about tax havens in the form of, very simply, shell corporation buying physical property, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the tax haven is, and then turning around and on your actual taxes for your country, taking that as a loss, right? Because it's an expenditure for a corporation to purchase an asset, right?
Right.
And that kind of stuff. So it's a very simple process, and in some places very legal, right?
Yeah. And
the people that have done this, though, again, I don't think there's anybody that reads this so far of what's come out of this, and I'm not reading 12 million affidavits, files. I'm not reading them. What's so far come out of this, I don't think surprises anybody, right? Whether it's politicians, is it really a story that a politician in America, in Great Britain, in Russia, or anywhere else bought a $5 million home in the Alps of wherever that, you know what I mean?
In the name of their mistress.
In the name of their, right, exactly. Is that a surprise to anybody? I mean,
it's not. But here's what is a surprise to me, and here's where I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat. There's no Western countries in these papers. There's no America. You're not finding out about the sitting president, the former president, or there's an entire TikTok trend right now of tracking the trades of people in Congress, including the Speaker of the House, and making money from it, because what they're and it's people are making. People are saying these are some of the most brilliant trades of all time. I wonder where they come up with this stuff.
Well, but it's not illegal, right?
Yeah, it's not illegal.
And that becomes the problem is a lot of things, and this just brings it up. A lot of these, well, you just said it on taxes, right? If there's a way out, the Supreme Court has said if there's a way out, that this is the argument of simplifying tax code. There's actually right now, they're talking about international business taxes, right? And these kind of things. So are they ever going to do anything to close these quote-unquote loopholes? Are they ever going to do anything to make things like, should Congress be able to buy stock in a company that they have a say in giving a government contract? And guess what? This is not a new thing. They've been doing this since the creation of government with shipping contracts and, you know what I mean? All these kind of things.
This is the second oldest profession.
Right.
Yeah. So, and listen.
It's called grifting for a reason. You know what I mean? Like,
I included this. This is a pseudo-political story, but the reason I included that in the lineup this week was how quickly nobody cares about this. And
it was astounding to me. It was really surprising. I thought this was actually going to be a story, and it turned out to be nothing as far as people caring.
Because for one reason or another, society has this thing about holding to account the petty, just the decamillionaire, the decimillionaire with $100 million, who's tucking his money so his ex-wife can't get it. Here in Texas, we have a billionaire down in Houston who his money didn't have to leave the shore. His money was just tucked away in a trust in South Dakota, and his ex-wife will get nothing. That's what she deserves, by the way.
Dan, that is not an opinion of me or Market Explainer. That's an opinion of Danny. I didn't say that, nor do I necessarily agree with that.
So, but what the roundabout here is, the kind of overall perspective here is, for some reason, everyone's fine with government officials. And in many of these situations, countries that the United States, you, the taxpayer, sitting right now, listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, have unwittingly provided financing for several of these
aid and funding and stuff like that, and they've got more than that sitting in offshore accounts that the heads of state have tucked away, hidden and tucked away. Yeah.
So there was this, I'll close on this. This is a political whatever, but there was this congressman, an old congressman, a country doctor from here in Texas, who said foreign aid is where you take from the poor and the middle class of a first world country and give it to the 1% of a third world country, or the president of a third. And that's literally what has happened here. So however you think things should be distributed, the reality is you're taking from poor and middle class people whose number one largest line item household expense is taxes in the United States. The largest line item single expense a family in the United States has is their taxes.
Uh-huh.
And we're taking that money from those people, food out of their kids' mouths, gas out of their tank, so we can give it to some king, some president of some country that you're never going to visit because it's too icky to visit. Just saying.
Again, those are the opinions of Danny that I don't necessarily agree with, not Market Explainer. You can always email him at danny@upyours.com.
That's correct.
I think to close out, my final thought of this is I've yet to read a single article that holds anyone accountable for anything that's came out of this. Not a single one. That
you can't hold them accountable.
When I say accountability, I mean there are different levels of accountability, like a slap on the wrist or go to jail, right? There's all these things in the middle. I have yet to read a single article about anyone, including the Queen of England, that is in these papers that has there's been nothing happen to. Nothing. Nothing.
And it's simple. People accept that this is the cost of the state. And what is offensive to me as a guy who, has opinions about government, it's what's offensive is that they're like, hey, there's a guy who made $10 million who's just trying to keep us $10 million. He made 30 million. He already gave 20 of it to the government. He's just trying to keep this last 10. And so he does all this trickery and chicanery. But here's this government official, hundreds of millions of taxpayer, funding from the various governments all over the world. Well, naturally, he should be tucking this away in the name of his mistress. Who cares?
Well, and again, if there's no accountability, they're going to continue to do it, right?
There's no way to hold them accountable. But we're going to move on to another story. But before we do that, I have to tell you about Big Man Gear. Big Man Gear is the big man's clothing company delivered to you by Amazon Prime. We're good friends with Jeff Bezos, and he's intimately involved in the process of delivering these goods to you.
Hey, don't make fun of Jeff. All right, he let William Shatner go up in his penis-shaped rocket ship this past week, so you leave Jeff alone, okay?
Dick rockets, what a country!
Oldest man in the outer space, by the way. Oldest man to ever visit outer space is William Shatner.
Good for him. He was not. He was fake visiting outer space for how many decades? So, he real visited outer space.
Which is why it was a cool story. But anyway, go ahead.
BigManGear.com. You can go there right now. You can get graphic tees from our good friend, the Big Man. So this next story hits close to home because Elon and Jeff actually come over on Thursdays for the poker game. We have the logo. It's Joe, Elon, Jeff.
Sure.
To our headquarters. And Tesla is moving their headquarters from California, from Palo Alto to Austin, Texas.
Is this a surprise to anybody? Like, seriously, when Elon moved here last year, is this a surprise to anybody? Like, seriously, everybody knows a couple of things about California, one of them being their taxes are insane, especially for rich people, right? Their state taxes. And people also know that the state of Texas does not have state taxes. Right. So when you got a guy like Elon Musk that is building a gigafactory in Austin, now it's said that he's going to build another factory across from where he's building the gigafactory in Austin, and he's basically bought an entire town for his SpaceX program in South Texas. Do you really think that he wasn't ultimately going to move down here, have all of these things going on, and not move his headquarters? That makes no sense to me if you think this is a surprise. The actual most surprising part about this article, though, is typically when a company moves its headquarters from one state to another,
Yeah.
they kind of pull out of that state. Not always entirely, but they kind of scale back their business in that state, right? That kind of stuff.
Right.
According to what Elon Musk is saying, however, they're looking at increasing their gigafactory that's in California,
In
looking
Fremont.
at increasing its production, looking
Right.
at increasing what they do there and that kind of stuff. I think that's in part he wanted to tell Californians and California that their
Yeah.
jobs aren't at risk. I'm not taking any jobs away from Californians. I'm actually looking to grow the jobs, that kind of thing. I
Well,
think that was kind of political.
I think it's political for the moment, but my personal view is once he gets the factory up in Austin, he stands up the factory in Round Rock.
Mm-hmm.
Once he has another factory out in Nevada. I think that he is going to slowly shift production with the new generation of Tesla models that comes out. Because California is just an unfriendly place to do business, and he's better off going to Utah and building a massive factory somewhere in Utah than he is trying to deal with California's regulatory burden. And that's what I think. I think
it's workforce, like you just said. The fact is, he now knows after opening up a couple of these factories that getting the place built is only one part of the process.
Yes,
staffing it, training people, getting it up and running. It literally says in a couple of these articles that I think he built one in Shanghai, right?
Yep.
And he built it. It took him 11 months to build the plant, but something like 14 months to get it up and running afterwards.
Right.
Because you have to bring, again, you're talking about a completely new way of building a product. This is not go out and hire an assembly line worker that's done the same job for 30 years. The technology is different, how they're building these cars, the way they're building them with the advent of machines that are automated and all these different kinds of things. You have to grab an intelligent person. First of all, you have to find an intelligent person. Then you have to train that intelligent person, and then you have to get them up to speed. That takes a long time, right?
Right.
So I think, and like you just said, California is, while people would argue that it's a very employee, but you know what I mean, friendly state, it's not a very business friendly state.
Right.
So
and
you
that's
add
who the
that
employees work for. You know?
Yeah, and you add that on top of a difficult business model like Tesla's having to create their employees, right? From training them and stuff like that. Do you want to do that in California, where you have a lot of rules and regulations and issues in a place like that, where you can't be very nimble?
Right. And so my thought process is Elon Musk says this, and then over time, he builds out more factories in the right to work, no income tax states like Tennessee, Texas, Nevada, and slowly draws down. Because listen, so the plant that Elon Musk is building out of in Fremont, California, was once used by a partnership between Toyota and General Motors called the NUMMI, which was later dissolved. And neither General Motors or Toyota wants to be in California. So Elon Musk was simply going the path of least resistance, buying an existing factory, which has been done now by like Lordstown Motors, owned a former General Motors factory. But Lordstown Motors ended up having to sell it to the manufacturer of iPhones, because they're going to help other companies build batteries there. But ultimately, why did Toyota want to leave? Toyota left in the last 5 years to Plano, Texas. Why? Because the environment and ultimately being pro-employee isn't bad on its face. But if you create a situation where employees can't be employed by employers, what's the point?
Well, look, I think, my hot take on companies taking over outdated, building, commercial buildings that are like that. I think that is already proven that it doesn't work well. I think, you know what I mean? Tesla proved that it didn't work very well. so which is why they're building their own factories, right? Ford, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, heavily investing into electric vehicles. They're building another factory, and they have obviously factories that they could retrofit. I think it comes out cheaper and more sustainable for them to build better updated technological based facilities than it does to retrofit these older buildings and that kind of stuff.
And that's another reason why I think the Fremont, California plant isn't long for this world. I think that eventually there's going to be a future in which Tesla either becomes a manufacturing partner to existing automotive companies, or they get acquired or something like that, because the Lone Ranger Act for Tesla, I just don't know that it has sustainability. That's all.
Well, and you and I have talked about that. I think electric vehicles as a whole end up. I think if they do catch on, which I'm not certain that they will. You and I have talked about this in length. That
I don't think they're going to catch on.
More of a hybrid model, like you. But that takes partnering with your Ford, your General Motors, your whatever. I think I agree with you on that. Now, not to say that there's not a market in the future for fully electric vehicles. I think there is a place for Tesla to have its name on all electric vehicles forever, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't combine technologies with a partnership with Ford and or General Motors and or everybody else and go, hey, we're going to develop a single engine or a series of 5 engines that everybody's going to use because they all meet the government mandates, they all meet the whatever, right? And we can train everybody to work on these across our network of mechanics and blah, 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 blah. I think the more interesting thing going forward is actually battery power and how that changes than it is actual engines, right? And electric versus gas and that kind of stuff.
The battery technology to me is going to be the more interesting, the rampant,
Absolutely. Here in Cedar Park, we actually have a battery research and development company that is working with Tesla and several other, trying to figure some things like that out. So I think it's going to be a little bit, I think that's a more interesting when we start talking about investments and changes and stuff like that. I think battery power and capacity and how those things work is a much more interesting and opportunistic than some of these buying like Tesla stock or whatever. The other thing I think is important about this is Tesla is just the latest of a laundry list of companies moving to Texas. Texas has, now this is not, look, you and I, I'm from Texas, you're a Texan, right, by proxy at this point, and there's a lot of things that are great for these companies. I don't want to paint a perfect picture of Texas in that there are hurdles. Tesla, for example, cannot sell their model of directly to consumer. They can't do that in the state of Texas. Okay?
It's illegal here.
It's illegal here, right? They have to go through a dealership of some sort, which I don't necessarily, there's a reason that model was created in the first place.
Right.
And whether Tesla ends up, they've applied for waivers, for example. None of them have gone through. Texas, the state of Texas as a government only meets every 2 years. They didn't get anything passed this last Congress session, so they'll try again. But whether it's a waiver or whether, again, they end up with partnerships, right? Why wouldn't you go into a Chevrolet dealership, a Ford dealership, or whatever that are already existing and find a way to make a deal with Ford, Chevy, Mercury, whatever, and go, hey, we need to also sell Teslas here. Let's figure this out, right? And that kind of thing.
I get why he did things the way he did things, but I don't know that. Nonetheless, the whole of the story is Tesla is moving its headquarters to Austin. How does this work for Austinites? I don't know that it's going to hurt any more than all these other companies moving here.
I tell you what, it affects Austin, and this is in the Austin and surrounding area, because we keep saying Austin, but it's really Round Rock. You know what I mean? But really, it affects things that people don't think about. I mean, does it? again, if they're keeping their company in California, right, which he says he is,
keeping your factory.
Factory, moving their headquarters, it's not a huge job creation for Austin, right?
It's more, it's got to be some.
It'll be some, but I'm saying it's not a 30,000 person job creation for Austin or anything like that. This is a lot of paperwork. This is a lot of that kind of stuff. It's a more prestigious thing, right? Well, Tesla's headquarters is now in Austin and that kind of stuff. What it does create though is, for that simple move, is it's going to make the housing market even worse. That's already a bad thing. You will create jobs in the form of people building houses around this factory, people building things and commercial buildings. There will be money made off of this move, even though it's just Tesla and paperwork mostly, right? For their benefit. The real money that'll be made off of this move to Austin will be made by this wave, auxiliary ripple of businesses surrounding it.
Let me ask you this much. I'm trying to find this and I couldn't find it. Where is their headquarters going to be? Is it going to be by their factory in Round Rock? Is that what they're going to do?
They didn't state in this article at all. I would assume article came out, or the news came out about a month and a half ago, that Tesla directly across the street from their Gigafactory bought all the land across from their current Gigafactory building. And initially it was said that they were going to use that to support SpaceX down south. I think what you're now going to figure out is this was their plan all along. They're going to move their headquarters into that building, along with SpaceX or whatever, and build it out to be a hub of what is their headquarters, right? We got people from SpaceX, we got people from, our different subsidiaries. Here's where they sit.
Right. So in closing, let's just remember that this year, there was a recording from a court case where Elon Musk talked about how he doesn't care too much for being CEO of Tesla, which lends credence to the notion that with the right partnership or the right acquisition, Elon Musk would focus his full attention on Mars.
Okay. Well, and if you like conspiracies, like Danny always says, not that Elon Musk necessarily needs more money, but this also happens right after the board gave him a contract that is laden with goals of growth and stuff like that. So he gets this contract that says he can create more wealth just by accomplishing these goals. And all of a sudden it moves to, he starts making all these moves. Right? And because if he reaches those goals, he becomes even a richer man than he already is. And all these things. And look, when you're that, there's been books written about the fact that the reason these aliens like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all these guys exist, Steve Jobs and whatever, is because no matter how rich they get, no matter how whatever they get, they continue to have these growth goals. It's what drives them. It's what makes them different. And you give a guy you give a guy like Elon Musk that doesn't really need the money, but you give him goals. He starts shaking things up.
And the real hard part for the average guy living his life in the United States of America about the growth of Tesla is that we have to continue to deal with the hipster doofuses that buy these vehicles and say, "Don't I have a cool car?"
I can't. You and I have talked at length about. You and I have no problem with Tesla. We have a problem with Tesla drivers.
Correct.
That's who we have a problem with. All right, what are we doing next?
This next story, before we jump into it, I want to tell you about my website, workathomstuff.com. As we all know, working at home ain't going away.
It is not.
So you're going to need stuff to make that home office an office. You can go to workathomstuff.com. We have reviews on chairs and desks, and I want you to check out those products, and you'll get linked off to Amazon. Of which this is a Amazon affiliate website. So that's workathomstuff.com.
Yep.
Now, This is a fun story. Super awesome. Very exciting. Not remotely political. Walgreens is closing 5 stores in San Francisco, citing organized shoplifting. And also along these lines, Target's closed at 6 p.m. in the Bay Area. And Target has closed, I believe, 2 stores because of the exact same issue. Totally cool, right? Awesome.
Well, by the way, adding these 5 will mark 22 total Walgreens that have shut in the Bay Area in the last 14 months.
Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
It's only almost half of their stores. Now, when we say citing, look, there's a lot of people that are saying different things. What Walgreens is saying is they're citing, and so is Target, by the way, by closing at 6 or whatever. They're citing organized shoplifting. Now, I'll go back. I was, and still to my knowledge, I am the youngest Walgreens store manager that have ever been. I was given a store when I was 18 years old by Walgreens, right? So, to run. And the point, though, is we had a policy back then that I actually almost got fired for. I was coming into work one day, literally coming from my car, walking into the Walgreens. Person comes running out the door. Obviously, I say obviously, after the fact, learned that he had stolen something and was running out the door. And look, I played football, right, in school and stuff like that. Someone runs to you instead of taking it and smashing it, you shuck them. It's called shucking in football, right? You absorb and push off that gravity. Well, when I did that, the guy went basically face first into one of those concrete pylons.
Which, if he wasn't running after he had stolen something,
in Walgreens, right? And basically said, basically the way the story was spun was I was trying to stop him from stealing. Now, at that time, and I'm pretty sure Walgreens still has this policy, you are not allowed as the store employee to do anything about people shoplifting. You are not, it is against their policy. If you do anything to stop them, you are fired.
Really?
That is their policy. That's why I say I almost got fired.
Right.
And the logic is safety, right? It's responsibility. That if you get hurt as an employee of Walgreens because you're trying to stop someone from stealing $20 worth of crap, is it worth it? Right. Because actually, and this being a store manager, 90% of all retail theft actually comes from employees.
Oh, that's good.
Not so their theory, when you talk about loss prevention at retail stores, is if they could stop employee theft, it wouldn't matter how much actually walked out the front door by others, because you'd be stopping 90% of it, right?
Yeah, which is the most you can hope for.
Right, exactly. So they wouldn't care. So so a liability is the reason. So when you talk about these kind of stories, you're talking about organized people that have now figured this out. And figured out that, well, if I'm not going to be stopped, there was a viral video in June and I say viral, I mean, it went everywhere because it brought up this question. It highlighted this problem that they're talking about, where it was a employee of a Walgreens with their camera out, watching someone on a bike inside the store, loading things into a black garbage bag, and then just writing out the store with it.
What's wrong with that? God bless America.
Now, eventually this guy was caught because he was an idiot, because he did it, I think, a half a dozen times at the exact same location.
Switch it up, pal.
So, but here's what's happening. I kind of combined this with 2 different stories. There's a story that just came out because they were just sentenced, father and daughter, that over a period of the last 8-9 years have stolen an estimated or have made an estimated $6 million off of organized retail theft.
Yeah. And there's an article in Wall Street Journal. I didn't read it. I just saw the headline. It was something in the excess of $30 million that CVS was combating. $30 million of theft. I watched a TikTok video of somebody who's waiting for their prescription, and they just watch a guy burly big guy, walk behind, this is just it's just a little swinging door,
Right.
plows through the door, and, let's deal in reality. More diminutively sized, smaller women working there. Big burly guy just comes in, loads up a bunch of stuff off the prescription shelf.
Sure.
And he's not even running. He's just he's moseying out the front door.
Well, because and so you had this organized retail theft, right?
In this
case, the one I was saying that just got cited, they each got 5 years in jail, which is, again,
They're going to keep the money.
Yes, because they spent it. Like there's restitution that they added onto it. I think they were told to pay back $4.3 million. Well, if they took $6 and spent it, if they're in jail now, where are they getting the $4.35 million? Because I guarantee it's not sitting in their bank accounts.
If you had stole $6.1 million, invested that $2 correctly, you could cover your restitution.
Well, that's the Wolf of Wall Street thing, right? The guy went to jail, but he was still rich. He didn't have to pay back all the money that he stole from people over the Wolf of Wall Street. Danny would argue that he didn't steal anything, but
that's not true.
The point here is you have people, and this is where, again, Danny's not going to care about this, but really what this is about people taking advantage of people, meaning the people that are actually stealing these that they're using to steal from Target and Walgreens or whatever. These are typically people in low income areas. They're homeless, they're whatever. They steal these objects and take it to, like in that case with the father-daughter combo there, they were taking it to a warehouse. And then they were giving them pennies on the dollar for these products and then turn around and selling them for almost full price on, guess what? Amazon.com, Walmart.com, all of these open platforms where, hey, if you have a product, you can sell it.
So what's interesting is in San Francisco, and now this isn't related to the case of the father and daughter because they're in Atlanta, but the case of San Francisco, they don't prosecute over under a certain dollar amount. I think that's around $1,000 or $900 some dollars. They don't prosecute petty theft, and so it isn't simply Walgreens' bad policy. Or I understand the policy, but it's combined with the fact that the city is not going to do anything about people stealing from you. And there is a concern in lower income communities of something called a food desert, where you can't get fresh produce because there are no grocery stores. And there's all these wild conspiracies as to why that's the case. When a situation like this, you look at a Walgreens, there's a large corporation saying, we can't operate profitably in the Bay Area. Same thing with Target. We have to close by 6 o'clock. Now, if you take that data from the large corporation and go, hey, wait, if $1 billion corporation like Walgreens or Target can't properly function in your location, how do you expect a mom and pop to stand up a grocery store? Because most grocery stores are regional chains. If a regional chain that, they do $100 million in annual sales, the profit on groceries hovers around 1 or 2%. Right?
Exactly.
Net numbers after taxes, paying everybody, disposing of bad goods, all that other stuff, food waste, all this other jazz, talking about 1 or 2%. Why is it? And then if you just add the shrinkage factor of 0.5%, you're eating up a quarter of the profits just in theft. You're going to close.
Well, but this is also the reason, and people don't get this, theft, corporations don't take losses for anything, right?
Right.
So what they do, and this is why, even here in Austin, I can walk into a Walgreens in Cedar Park, where I live, and buy a product. If I go to East Austin, that product may be 20% more. Right? Because what they do on any given store, it's built into their pricing. If I have a high theft store, they just take that and build it into the pricing. So the people that are buying products in that area, again, lower income, impoverished areas, are paying more for products than people in higher class areas because of the theft. They just incorporated into their business model for that area, right? So San Francisco has come out as a city and said Walgreens shouldn't do this. So they're trying to paint Walgreens as the bad guy here, because guess what? Old folks go to Walgreens, right? People go to Walgreens after work on their way home because they're treated like a convenience store, right?
Right. I don't understand how Walgreens ends up being the bad guy for saying, hey, we don't want to put our employees at risk because of the rampant theft. Mm-hmm. And listen, I'm no cop fan here, but like, let's just be honest. If you don't let the police do the job of like, hey, you can't steal things. That's a basic premise of a society, of a functioning society, is right. You don't get to steal stuff. Now, I've heard stories, don't know if they're true, on various podcasts about how you can go outside of a Walgreens in places like San Francisco and New York City, mm-hmm. and down the street a block or two, a guy will set up a card table and he's selling everything he just stole at a Walgreens.
Right. Well, in today's world, they do it online because, again, nobody cares. Walmart, Amazon, all these different places, especially if you have bulk product. Hell, Amazon, if I have a bulk product, I can send it into Amazon. Amazon will take care of shipping it out within that 2 days. They don't ask me where I got it from. They don't care where it comes from. They just that they get their cut and that they get to go.
There's an entire business model where people buy stuff that's returned to Amazon, mm-hmm. and if they do the quality, the QC, the quality mm-hmm. control on it, and they say, hey, 15% of this stuff is garbage, but the rest of it's good. They return it to Amazon, and it goes back into Amazon FBA, and they're making margin, and that's good for them. I got no beef with people making money.
But if you stole this product, or you had someone steal this, there's no such thing as a margin, because it didn't cost you. It cost you next to nothing, and that's the whole that part has been figured out so consistently that people have. Again, you're always going to have people that abuse the system, and San Francisco is reeling. Right, like everybody's read about San Francisco's homeless population has grown so much. I actually went to San Francisco not too long ago. And we spent almost zero time in downtown San Francisco because, quite frankly, it's disgusting. There are people everywhere. The city is disgustingly dirty and that kind of stuff. So it's not surprising when you look at it from that standpoint. And the city is doing nothing to protect the businesses.
And let me just say something to the people of San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. Texas is full. Don't come. Oklahoma, on the other hand, plenty of room.
Plenty of land.
They got the vacancy sign on. Head right on out to Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something. If we just tell you it's Texas, you ain't gonna know the difference anyway. Right?
That's partially true. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They've got plenty of land, plenty of space. You can spread out.
And they got casinos. Texas won't let you have casinos yet. Don't come here. It's full. There's no space. Elon Musk isn't actually opening a factory here. Don't worry about it. He's not coming here.
Completely dismiss everything we've said.
It's not worth living here. Texas is all hype. There's no space. Don't come here.
No space.
New Mexico, plenty of space. Oklahoma,
I'm sure. New Mexico, Oklahoma, right? Yeah. Colorado. Go to Colorado. Weed's legal there, so go to Colorado.
Exactly. Before we close out our show today, I want to tell you about our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Market Explainer. We're going to be adding some shows there, different types of content, same nexus point of business, because that's what we love talking about. So you can go to patreon.com/Market Explainer. You can go to our website. Our website will show you everything we got going on.
Marketexplainer.com, yep. And I think we're gonna put all our follow-ups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And how often that Danny's wrong and I'm right. Or, how often we are right or we call a trend. Danny loves to point out the fact when he finds a story before it was a story, kind of thing. So I think those kinds of things. If you want to hear me talk about something political, I did do a radio show over the weekend back in my hometown.
That link will be somewhere, probably in the description of the show. So, but before we leave, I just want everyone to know that if you get a hold of me personally, I offer absolution for white guilt for a nominal, reoccurring monthly fee. In addition, I sell passes to make racial jokes. It's a revenue stream that I'm developing. So if you're looking for that, I'm also, this is Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Month. I am a diversity, inclusion, and equity coordinator and consultant.
So, reoccurring monthly fee for the white privilege, huh? Reoccurring?
White guilt. I absolve your white guilt for that. Yes.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Wow. That is somehow not surprising in the least.
Right.
We'll see you next time, folks.